Hi, I'm Nick Haig, and welcome to the World's Greatest Business Thinkers podcast. Scott Anthony is a professor at the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth College, where he teaches a course called Leading Disruptive Change. He previously spent 2 decades at Innosight, where he helped leaders design new growth strategies, build innovation capabilities, navigate disruptive innovation, and manage strategic transformation. He continues to serve as a senior advisor to Innosight. He's written 9 books, and his latest book is called Epic Disruptions: 11 Innovations That Shaped Our Modern World. I've read this book cover to cover, and it's fascinating, so I definitely know you're going to love today's episode. However, before you hear from Scott, I know I mention it every time, but it really does make a difference. So if you like what you hear, then make sure you follow and subscribe, as it helps the podcast to get found, which means we can continue doing the thing that we love. So thank you very much. Welcome to the World's Greatest Business Thinkers podcast, Scott.
Nick, I am thrilled to be with you again.
Yeah, well, you are here again, and it is a first, actually, because you're my first returning guest to the podcast. So thank you for coming back to talk about your latest book, which, the poster behind you on the shelves behind me here, Epic Disruptions. But before we do get into the book, it'd be really good if you could just give a short introduction to who you are and your specialism in disruptive innovation for those that haven't listened to the earlier podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So the brief background, I am a clinical professor of strategy at the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth College, which is where I am today. I specifically teach and research and write about how you navigate the complex challenges of disruptive change. It traces back to 25 years ago, meeting Clayton Christensen at the Harvard Business School, taking his class, doing research with him, and spending 20 years in the field as a consultant at Innosight, advising business leaders around the globe about the topic. Disruption has been my life for the past 25 years.
Yeah. And disruptive and innovation, these two words that come together. And I like the way that you frame innovation. It's doing something different, but it's doing something different that creates value. And that very much came through in all the stories that you share with us in the book. As you just mentioned there, your obsession started in 2000 when you were at Harvard with Clay Christensen, and he's been called the most influential management thinker of his time by The Economist. He wrote The Innovator's Dilemma, which has also been called the most influential business book of the early 21st century. So can you briefly give an overview of what The Innovator's Dilemma is and why it is so profound?
So I think the subtitle of his first book, published in 1997, says it all. So the book is titled The Innovator's Dilemma. The subtitle of the first version was When New Technologies Cause, wait for it, Great Firms to Fail. And that was the puzzle that he put his finger on. His research looked into why was it that sometimes smart, well-run companies would do everything that would seem to be right and still would struggle. Why stupid companies fail is an obvious question because they're stupid. Why smart companies fail is a really interesting question. And what Clay found is every once in a while, someone disrupted the status quo. They took things that were complicated and expensive, made them simple and affordable. They changed industry dynamics. They drove explosive growth. And historically, they led great firms to fail in the face of that market disruption.
Yeah. And I think looking into that, it is this paradox that, companies, it spots maybe an opportunity to disrupt, but they don't want to do so, do they? Because, the customers that they've got, they've invested in them. They want to listen to them. They just want to continue to command maybe premium prices that they can with their customers, pushing up prices, pushing up margins, even in the face of this disruptive change.
You have read the book, so that is exactly right. And, look, I'm living through it right now. So 3 years ago, I transitioned from being a consultant to working at a university. And I thought, okay, I'm safe. I've spent the last 2 decades in daily hand-to-hand combat, sometimes with clients, sometimes with problems, sometimes even with colleagues. But now I'm in a university. They don't change at all. And then 3 months after I joined, ChatGPT comes out, and we now are facing a massive disruptive change, and it meets and ticks all the boxes. It's competing in different ways. It's coming to different places. And on the one hand, we can sit here and say, hey, we're a great school. People will always want to come here. On the other hand, history teaches us if we don't adapt and change, we will be in trouble. And credit to the leadership team here. There's a lot of adaptation and change that's taking place, but still, we're right in the maelstrom of disruptive change.
Yeah, yeah. Well, therefore, let's get on to the book, and I'm really intrigued on why you decided to write Epic Disruptions in the first instance. Because I know when I spoke to you, it was just over a year ago now. Then you were in the midst of doing all the research and putting it together. So what inspired you, and what do you hope readers to take away from the book?
It's a great question, and there's the official answer and there's the real answer. You get, of course, the real answer. The real answer was the publisher suggested the book to me. I had a different idea I brought to my publisher. I teach this class, Leading Disruptive Change. I pitched an idea based on that class, and the publisher said, "We're interested in that at some point, but right now we have a different idea for you." They had just named disruptive innovation one of 4 ideas that shaped modern business, along with maximizing shareholder value, scientific management, and emotional intelligence. And they said, what if you took a really different approach and looked at disruption through the lens of history? And at first, I'm like, well, this isn't the book I want to write. But then it just kind of wormed its way into my brain. I said, there are still so many open questions about disruption. People get it wrong again and again. I've never done a history book. Why don't we try something really different and see what we learn from it? And then in the end, what I hope people take away from it is that there are a set of things that you can take from history that can help you understand the present. They are timeless stories that help us with the fiercely urgent moment that we face right now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've already shared with this on email when I'd read the book, but I never enjoyed history at school. But if my teachers had taught me history like you have written this book, then I'd have certainly lapped it up. So it's a fantastic book. I'm curious, like how do you define an epic disruption? How does it differ from just a regular industry disruption?
Well, epic, if you look it up in the dictionary, is something that's really big. But, the way that I think about it comes from Sir Francis Bacon, who makes an appearance in chapter 3 in the book. In his 1620 book, Novum Organum, he said that there have been 3 things in world history that have changed the state and appearance of the entire world. And that was the compass, printing press, and gunpowder, 2 of which are profiled in Epic Disruptions. That idea that you can see a clear difference before and after, where the world's different, materially different because of that epic disruption. That's the mental model that I had in my head. Is it black and white? Of course not. There are shades of gray. I say early in the book, I am not a historian. This is not really a history book. It is history-ish. I did do a lot of research, but there are stories in it. I'm sure there are some corners that were cut somewhere in the name of telling a good story. And there certainly are other things that people have said to me. What about having fertilizer in the book, for example? What about having this form of chemical in this, that, or the other? Epic Disruptions 2 has got a long list of things that could go in it. That's for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And I know the actual title was going to be Anomalies Wanted, and I definitely prefer Epic Disruptions that you ended up with. But why the change? And can you tell the listeners a bit about that original title? Because again, it harks back to Clay and a sign he had in his office, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, and that was one was actually the second title. So the very first title
Right.
was Magic Methods and a Bit of Madness, How Disruptive Innovators Change the World. That's too long. So then version 2 was Anomalies Wanted. And of course, this was what Clay sought to do and goes back to his original question. Anomalies Wanted. You want the thing that you don't expect. You want the thing that cannot be explained. That's what started him on his research direction. How do you go and understand why doing what seem to be the right things are actually the wrong things? And every disruption is an anomaly. It's a break from the past. It doesn't make sense when you first see it. Chris Dixon at Andreessen Horowitz defines a disruption as a great idea that sounds like a stupid idea the first time you hear it. Airbnb, let's let randos sleep on our couches. That's crazy until someone actually does it. So why did we go to epic disruptions? Anomalies Wanted takes a little bit too long to explain. Epic Disruptions is kind of obvious. And I still got Anomalies Wanted as a chapter title for chapter 11, so it's still in there.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. So the book itself, it covers 11 epic disruptions, and I'm sure it's hard for for you to land on these 11, but why 11 and not 10 or 12? And you've mentioned, the likes of fertilizer and chemicals, or other disruptions, the internet, renewable energy. How did you come across and land on these 11, and why 11? Was it just a word count thing?
Books are always an iterative process. I mentioned three different titles. There were three full-length versions of the book, and 11 was what emerged in the third writing. It's really interesting, at least to me. I don't know if it'll be interesting to anybody else. But, I'm going back and forth with my editor over the third and ultimately final version, and we come up with Epic Disruptions as the title. He subtitles it as 10 Innovations That Shaped Our Modern World. And that sat there for a few weeks, and then I was like, Kevin, I'm counting the number of chapters. There are 11, not 10. It's like, oh gosh, glad we caught that. And why 11? I think, honestly, I'm a huge fan of the movie This Is Spinal Tap. And if you know This Is Spinal Tap, you understand this one just had to go to 11. And little did I know that Spinal Tap was going to introduce its sequel literally 4 days before the book came out. My wife and I were two of 13 people in the movie theater in Brookline, Massachusetts that saw it on release day. And we loved it. Maybe not for everybody, but we thought it was awesome. So anyway, this one goes to 11. That's why there's 11.
Well, I actually didn't make that connection, Scott, but I did see on one of your LinkedIn posts about you going to the movies to watch that Spinal
Which
Tap.
must have been just bewildering if you don't have that connection to it. It's like, great, why are you going to see Spinal Tap? But I did. I will say, I don't mind saying this here. I did try to network to the actors in Spinal Tap to see if we could do some cross promotion. And I did actually get the email address of one of them and got the PR people of another one, but my requests were not replied to. So it goes. I shot my shot at least.
Yeah, you gave it a try. So, okay, well, the epic disruptions we could talk about. They're wide and varied. You've mentioned some. It ranges from gunpowder, the printing press, Julie Child, and the first commercially successful cookbook. But I'd like to start with the chapter about Florence Nightingale, as I'm a career market researcher, therefore a bit of a data geek at heart, partial to a good chart or data visualization at least. And I was fascinated to read about Florence Nightingale's remarkable visuals, because I didn't know anything about this side of her. How she got data and started to visualize them drove this societal shift from treatment towards prevention, and also that fed into her work and how she built schools, wrote manuals, and enabled the broader population to serve as effective nurses. So can you talk a bit about this story? Because I only knew her as the Lady of the Lamp, so I'm sure many others probably do too.
No, and I think it is a really great story. One of the things I came to appreciate from doing this work, anytime you study, you see that there are facets that you just hadn't thought of before. And the thing that I think Florence Nightingale really illustrates is disruption comes in lots of forms. It's not just technology. It can be visuals, teaching, and words. So here's the short version of the story. 1820, Florence Nightingale is born in, of course, Florence, Italy. When she's a teenager, she gets a call from God to go into service as a nurse. Now, her parents are very unhappy about this call. She grew up in an upper class family. At the time, nursing was a lower class profession, but she was very persistent. She gets trained. She starts working in London. Then in the mid 1850s, she gets sent to the Scutari Hospital during the Crimean War in modern day Turkey. When she gets there, she sees something that is just a nightmare. It's squalid conditions. There's open sewage. There's not clean air. And it turns out, she learns, the most dangerous place to be is not on the battlefield. It's actually in the hospital, because all these infectious diseases are spreading. She sends a telegram back to London, send a team of experts to clean the hospital up. They do. Things get a lot better. She goes back to England, meets with the Queen, and is asked to serve on a royal commission about the conditions inside hospitals. She meets this guy, William Farr, who's running the general registry, and they do this amazing work to gather data and interpret the data and come up with this visual that one person who studies the history of visualization, people do these kinds of things, said has interocularity, a word I had never heard before. But the idea is it hits you right between the eyes. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's what's known as a polar area chart. If you go and look at it, you see inexorably the power of following good prevention and good hygiene standards. There are these flying wedges that show how bad it is to be in a hospital that dramatically shrink once you go and clean things up. When this is introduced in 1858, it causes a sensation. Florence Nightingale continues to push for reform. In 1875, Public Health Act is passed, which leads to all the things we take for granted today, like having good sewage systems and indoor plumbing and clean air and fresh light that really change many things in world health. Life expectancy, which had been flat for hundreds of years, begins to increase, really helping to usher in the modern age. Of course, it doesn't all come down to that chart, but that chart played a really big role. Amazing power of visual and data.
Yeah. Yeah, just capturing it and being able to categorize it and analyze it and share with others. The power that it brought was yeah, it left a wake in her path. And well, Adam Grant is a hero of mine, and I love what he says. He says, the pen might not be mightier than the sword, but its ink lasts longer, and that's definitely true in Florence Nightingale's case. Is that book that she wrote on Notes on Nursing. There was nothing before it, was there? And she brought this knowledge to the masses, changed the face of it.
For sure. And, that book came out in 1859. She had a nice run. 1858, the polar area chart comes out. 1859, Notes on Nursing comes out in the UK, immediately sells out. The American version comes in 1860, the first year that new nurses are trained in a teaching hospital. And those Nightingales then go and fly throughout the world, bringing these techniques to more places. There's a clear implication for this for today's business leaders. You are trying to drive system level change. Get the data, tell the story, detail the methods, go and train people to go and do it. There are very clear implications from this reasonably old story, even today.
Yeah. And one thing I didn't realize is as well, because I knew she was British, but I didn't realize she was born in Italy, in Florence, in Italy. So hence the name too. Okay, so next in the book, as we move, is the story of Henry Ford and how the Model T put the world on wheels. But this is again a fascinating story for different reasons on how even if you're not first to market, you can still win by thinking differently about systems, processes, but also about, and again, this is something I didn't realize, putting purpose before profit.
And that was the thing that Henry Ford said. He had a very clear vision to create the car for the great multitudes. And to create the car for the great multitudes, the number one thing to do is to bring the cost down. So everything is based around how do we make a car that is affordable to the great multitudes. So when the Model T comes out in 1908, it is a technological marvel, but it's just too expensive. It costs 30,000 US dollars in today's terms. They work on improving and refining the process. By 1911, that's down to $20,000. But if your singular focus is on driving prices down, that's not enough. Ultimately, we know what Ford and team did. They came up with the assembly line. They did not invent it. Other people had been playing around with it in other industries and in automobiles, but they really perfected it to the point where by 1924, a Model T cost only 5,000 US dollars in today's terms. There's other things that happen along the way. Ford is known for this bold move to pay very high wages in relative terms to his workers. Was he being generous? Arguably, no. Turnover was incredibly high. If you give high wages, the turnover disappears. So actually, this is a very smart way to decrease your cost because you don't have to bring new people in, which allows you to lower your prices, and on it goes. The singular focus that we really are going to drive the price down drove, no pun intended, or maybe pun intended, I don't know, drove every decision that Ford made and changed the world.
Yeah, yeah. And well, we all know Henry Ford's famous quote, if I'd asked customers what they wanted, then they would have told me a faster horse. But he had a vision, didn't he? What I like it from the book, he was called the most brilliant and the most senseless marketeer in American history by world famous Theodore Levitt. And his senselessness, as you depict in the book, was telling customers they could have any color they wanted as long as it was black. We know that. But what was brilliant about this is because it allowed this standardization, simplification, and of course that driving down of low prices. You can't have 5 colors or endless choice of colors. You've got to have black. So no, it's a fabulous story that's definitely worth reliving.
And of course, too, worth reflecting that no strategy lasts forever. So, you've got Roger Martin sitting on the shelf behind you, and he will talk about how strategies often last longer than people think. but the world changes. So this view that we're going to be maniacally focused on driving costs down works for a couple decades, but then General Motors follows a very different strategy. And then you get the Japanese automobile manufacturers, and then you get electrification. And today we've got the Chinese manufacturers. The world changes, and your strategy has to change to keep up. That's a thing that we can reflect on from this story.
Yeah, yeah. So we're time traveling now, Scott, and we've gone from Henry Ford, and he opened up the roads, he opened up America, and the spread of the automobile led to this growth of connected cities, giving rise to suburbs, in which turn gave rise to the drive-in restaurant, which is very famous in America. And this leads us to the story of McDonald's. You couldn't have 11 epic disruptions without McDonald's probably being one of them. But like Henry Ford, they weren't first franchise food service chain. There were others before them, but the founding McDonald brothers, they were even the brains behind how it was scaled to what we know and love today. So again, can you just expand on that story and the twists and turns that happened within the McDonald's story itself?
It's a great story. And anyone who wants to visualize the movie The Founder with Michael Keaton, as best I can tell, is incredibly true to what actually happened. So, I mean,
Yeah.
it is a Hollywood movie, but it is grounded in fact. So, the short version of the story, the brothers McDonald's go and open up a restaurant in California. That's not particularly interesting. In 1948, then, they do something that is particularly interesting. They say, our restaurant's doing well, but we have to deal with customers absconding with utensils, and we got big crowds in our parking lots, and it takes forever to cook all the different things we have. Let's do something radically different. They introduced the speedy service system. Let's simplify, let's standardize, let's get down to 9 menu items: a hamburger, a cheeseburger, fries, milkshakes, and 5 other drinks. Sales explode. 1954, somebody who sells equipment for milkshakes comes to visit the McDonald's stand. 1954, it's Ray Kroc. Ray Kroc sees this and he is astonished by the power of this model. He says, in essence, can I be your master franchiser? He then does something really interesting. Most people who are running franchise businesses extract it. They said, how do we get as much as we can from somebody who owns one of our franchise locations? Ray Kroc and team said, how do we embrace mutuality? How do we create shared value? How do we create a system where it's a win for everybody? Everything's working well except for one problem. By 1960, 6 years in, there are McDonald's popping up everywhere. They're doing well. The parent company, McDonald's Corporation, has only made 159,000 US dollars over 6 years. They hadn't figured out how to actually capture that value. Henry Sonneheim says, we're going to make money not through hamburgers, but through real estate. We're going to get really good at finding good plots of land, leasing it, and then subleasing it to franchise owners in, again, a win-win sort of way, but a way that can serve as the flywheel as we continue to grow. This unlocks everything. They created value in unique ways with the speedy service system. They delivered it in unique ways with the model where they embraced mutuality. They captured it in unique ways with the real estate model. Today, we call that a business model. Research shows that is the special sauce of disruptive innovation. That's what allowed McDonald's to serve billions profitably. That's what made Netflix, Google, Amazon, and so on. And the question you ask if you're looking at the world right now is, as we think about generative AI, you've got a lot of companies that are pouring a lot of money into the technology, but who's going to figure out unique ways to create, deliver, and capture value? That's not clear yet. And if the big models like Claude and people at OpenAI, if they don't figure this out, history suggests their lives as standalone companies will be finite. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I love the McDonald's story. I love the movie The Founder as well. And you're right, it very much aligns with the research that you've done in the book. And I like the fact that that they're always driving towards what the customer wants and trying to deliver customer value. And they did this through continued innovation, as you say. They had this speedy service system, but I also like the fact that they were very open with the franchise owners, weren't they? And so they were open to ideas and continue to innovate. So they came; these franchisees came with the fillet of fish, the Big Mac, the Egg McMuffin, and the hot apple pie that we know today. So And
And those were so necessary because Ray Kroc was great at many things, but coming up with menu ideas was clearly not his spike. One of the ones he introduced was the hula burger, which had pineapple and 2 slices of cheese on a bun. I have never tried such a concoction, but it did not succeed commercially for, I think, reasonably obvious reasons. So the fact that the franchise system is helping to innovate was pretty important.
Yeah, yeah. And I suppose before we move on from this, for all those that have read the book, I do need to ask you what your favourite McFlurry flavour is, because I know you're quite partial to one, Scott.
It's a good question. I'm trying to now go through the register of all the McFlurry flavors that I've had. I had this one in Amsterdam once. I don't even know exactly what it was, but it was like this mix of biscuits and caramel that was just so good. So it had some kind of Dutch name, so I cannot say what that was, but it was at the Amsterdam airport, and it was the best McFlurry that I've ever had.
I was in Italy just this summer, so I don't know whether you've tried a McFlurry in Italy. And wherever you go in the world, they're always putting a different twist on them. But I had a fantastic pistachio one, so I know they're always changing. But look out for that one if you ever see it. That was a
That's
good
a
one.
new one. I've not had that one, so I will add that to my bucket list.
Fabulous. So finally, I want to focus on the chapter entitled "Oh Crap." My last guest, well, for the reason my last guest on the podcast was Roger Martin, and he worked as an advisor for P&G for over 30 years. But this chapter specifically, hence the title, is about how Pampers was the first P&G brand to gross $10 billion in annual revenue, not by having the best quality idea, but through persistence, evolution, and how this team again handled the twists and turns in the path to success.
And it's a really important general point. And I'll say it at the beginning, I'll say it at the end. Disruption rewards patience and perseverance. There is no story that is an overnight success. There is no story where it's a straight line to victory. And Pampers really illustrates that. Brief version of the story. 1954, Vic Mills is asked to lead this new division in Procter & Gamble, go into new categories. 1956, he asks a guy named Bob Duncan to lead an effort to go into disposable diapers, nappies, depending on where you're from. At the time, 80% of US households had at least one disposable diaper at home. They cost on average 10 cents per diaper, but they only represented 1% of diaper changes because the quality was so bad. So it's pretty clear there was a market need, and someone needed to go and do what P&G ended up doing, which is come up with something that was affordable and reasonable quality. It was not an overnight success. 1958, a failed test market in Dallas, Texas. The idea was two-part pants where you had one layer and then a plastic layer that went around it. Perhaps not surprisingly, if you do this in August in Texas and subject children to what one researcher called a Turkish bath, it doesn't go very well. The technology wasn't right. 1960, they fail again. They've got the technology right, but people think it's too expensive. So they say the pricing isn't right. 1962, they've got the technology. They're beginning to get the pricing right, but it's still not clicking. They go and say, let's step back. Let's go on a fishing trip. I don't know if this was a metaphor. They actually went on a fishing trip. We've got to go and radically rethink the pricing. We thought we would compete at 10 cents. We're going to compete at 6.2 cents. This changed everything. Different distribution channel, different manufacturing approaches, but something that allowed it to connect to the marketplace. Finally, in 1964, it's beginning to work. 1965, they launch, and they learn that they're wrong again. They were wrong about the technology. They were wrong about the pricing. They didn't have the marketing right. And they were wrong about the consumer that would flock to the product. They assumed it was going to be wealthy consumers looking for convenience. It turned out it was working class families, because what this allowed is people to hold two jobs and work longer at those jobs because they didn't have to go and wash the diapers or nappies in centralized laundry facilities. So it really changed the lives of hundreds of millions of people who are now free to go and do other things. And again, back to where the story started, it's not a straight line. Disruption rewards patience and perseverance. Jeff Bezos once said, you have to be willing to be misunderstood for long periods of time. And that is absolutely true.
Yeah, yeah. And as you say, no idea is a perfect, no such thing as a perfect idea. Every idea starts out partly right, partly wrong, and it's about getting that feedback, tweaking the idea, persisting with the concept until you do get it right. The conclusive chapter is called What's Next? The Future of Disruption. And I know you don't give any conclusive answers in this chapter, but what are your thoughts about the future? And are we heading into a time when we'll experience more epic disruptions than ever before?
Yeah, I certainly think so. So I mentioned before Sir Francis Bacon and the three technologies he said in 1620 that had changed the state and appearance of the world. Those three technologies covered 2,000 years. Right now, we are grappling with autonomous vehicles, additive manufacturing, augmented reality, artificial intelligence. I have not left the letter A, and I've got up to four. I've
Yeah.
got six others that are in the conclusion of that book. It really is a phenomena that is affecting every leader of every organization. So I certainly think there is no reason to believe the pace and scale of disruptive change won't continue to accelerate. Keep in mind, though, balance against that, things often take longer than you think. So ChatGPT came in November of 2022, and people say this is an overnight success. Yes, 66 years in the making, because that's when research started in earnest at artificial intelligence. That started right here, not in my office, but at Dartmouth College with a conference in 1956. These things take time. That's the way it goes. But we will, as leaders, have to be grappling with more and more of these things. I view this as a good thing because disruption is a mechanism that opens up constrained markets, that enables more people to consume, that brings welfare to broader populations. But one thing that's persistent in the research is disruption casts a shadow. There are losers. Change can be very hard for all of us, and we need to understand that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And going back to what we discussed earlier about Clay Christensen and how many successful companies fall or fail in the face of disruptive change, what advice would you give so that one can spot an epic disruption on the horizon before it's too late?
The number one thing I tell people to do is to follow the advice of the great science fiction writer William Gibson, who once said, "The future's already arrived, it's just not very evenly distributed." So go and experience tomorrow today. So that might be going to labs and see what people are tinkering around with, looking at the flow of venture capital funding to see what they're funding, or the thing that I do, which is go and play with my kids and see what technologies they have picked up, and watch my 14-year-old engage with Roblox and Minecraft, and watch my 17-year-old do her digital art, and watch my 9-year-old never watch a linear television program, but watch Strange Things to Me and my wife, at least, on YouTube. And then watch my 19-year-old dabble with crypto and also do his stuff on social media. And when you go and experience this with the younger generation, you begin to get insight into how the world is changing. So
Yeah.
keep doing that. Experience tomorrow today.
Yeah. Great advice, Scott. I know you know Rita, and in fact, Rita's book there, Seeing Around Corners on the Shelf, is next to your book that we talked about last time, Eat, Sleep, Innovate. But I know Rita, in her book, Seeing Around Corners, she talks about looking for disruption using the analogy of snow melting from the edges, meaning, these significant changes. New developments often appear first in the most exposed peripheral areas. So, maybe it's not as obvious, but, look on the core, just as snow is exposed at the edges. Maybe the edges of your business or society can start to show you things before they start to impact, really at the center of everything else.
The thing that you just reflect on when you say this, Nick, is this isn't hard. So it's not hard to go to the edges, the periphery, spend time with young people, etc. There is a mindset that is required that is hard. And the mindset of a leader is the business model that I love, the business that I love, the organization that I love is fallible and finite. And I need to have my eyes open for what comes next. Andy Grove, of course, famously said, "Only the paranoid survive." I think that's partially true. I think there is an amendment to that. Only the optimistic thrive. So I think you do need a little bit of that healthy paranoia to say, hey, what I have here is not going to last. But the optimism to say, and what I will replace it with will be even better. Both
Yeah,
those things, think you need both of those things.
yeah, yeah. So to conclude, Scott, I've got my usual questions. I ask all my guests, and I need to look back to my last guest, who was Roger Martin, who I know you know. And Roger asks, in your long-time experience, what is the key to getting a senior exec who wasn't investing enough for his or her mind share in innovation to do so?
So we talked about one thing, which is to get them out and get them to experience the periphery edges, et cetera. The other thing that I think can be really helpful, most senior executives will be in their 50s and 60s. They generally will have slightly older children or maybe even grandchildren. It's to have them do a thought experiment and say, if your child or grandchild is walking into your organization in 20 years, and you're still doing what you're doing now, what does that look like? And immediately people are like, well, that cannot be the case because all these things are happening. You get trapped in the paradigm of today. Having people look at it through a different lens, through the next generation, can sometimes help them break out of it.
Yeah, yeah. More great advice there. So now a couple of questions from the listeners. So firstly, from Divya Lohia, she's in Mumbai, and she asks, how do leaders balance reacting fast to disruption while still playing the long game?
A very important question. So, I wrote the book Dual Transformation a couple books ago, and that says when you are dealing with disruptive change, you have to do two things at once. You have to make today as strong as possible. You have to create tomorrow. A lot of this is about good portfolio management, which both Rita and Roger have written really good things about, recognizing that there is not going to be a silver bullet. There's not going to be one thing that you do. You have to make sure you're covering and creating the surface area of exploration and exploitation, and you're doing it all. It sounds hard, but there's a lot of good tools out there to do it. To me, the hardest part, again, comes down to the mindset and the willingness of a leadership team to say, we don't know the answers. We're going to try some new things. Not everything's going to work. We're going to celebrate the ones that fail in the right sort of way. Amy Edmondson's intelligent failure and all that. That to me is the hard part. The technical tools are out there to help with it, but you do have to have the right mindset to use them well.
Yeah, yeah. And secondly, this is from a software company that asked the question on LinkedIn, so Quora AI in San Francisco, and they asked, what's the most common misconception leaders have about navigating disruptive change, and how do you address it?
Clay Christensen would often say that one of his big regrets is choosing the word disruption because that word is laden with meaning and it's often used in very different ways than what he found in his research. And I think the biggest problem is disruption itself kind of feels negative when you say it. Disruption, you kind of curl your lip up a little bit when it comes out of your mouth. So I think one of the big misconceptions is people say we have to think about the threat of disruption. And that then gets them to be very defensive. Yeah, that's true. Disruption can be a threat. But I think the mindset that you really want to have is that this is the opportunity that allows us to reach people we can't reach, to change market dynamics for the better, to create and drive new growth. If you think about the bad things, you'll make the bad things happen. If you go and imagine and dream about the good things, well, then you'll go and do some really fun things.
Yeah, yeah. So, Scott, what's the best piece of business advice you've ever been given?
This is, I'll go back to Clay. I mean, so the book is meant to honor his legacy and hopefully extend his legacy as well. Ask great questions. I was at one point in life contemplating going back to get a doctoral degree, which I decided not to do for different reasons, different story. But Clay said, if you do it, make sure you've got a great question on your mind, because if you have a great question on your mind, everything you see, you look at through the lens of that question. It expedites the path to do research. You make connections in ways that wouldn't be obvious. So I try to go into everything I do with a great question in my mind. When I teach, I try to ask my students great questions, sometimes better than others. But this idea of really grounding in good, rich questions, I think is great, timeless advice.
Yeah, yeah. And who would you like me to reach out to, invite to come on the podcast in the future?
So have you had Wendy Smith on your podcast before?
I have. In fact, Wendy was the very first guest on the podcast.
The very first guest. So I can't suggest Wendy. Have you had Howard Yu?
I haven't had Howard, no, and I have had him recommended, but I have failed to reach out to Howard. So, but I'd love to have him on.
So Howard Yu would be the recommendation. He also comes from the Clay Christensen coaching tree. In fact, when I contemplated getting that doctoral degree, I met him in the process of contemplation. He now teaches at IMD. He's working on something that really helps people understand the degree to which companies are susceptible to disruptive change. Has written a great book called Leap. Really good strategic thinker and an even better person.
Fabulous. I'll reach out to Howard again and hopefully be successful this time. Okay, well, finally, I always ask, get my current guest to ask a question of the upcoming guest. So my next guest is Douglas Lamont. He's the CEO of Tony's Chocolonely. Douglas joined the company in October 22 from Innocent Drinks, where he was CEO for 9 years. And he's a passionate advocate for business as a force for good that balances people, profit, and the planet. So some really fascinating stories from the two organisations he's worked for there. What question would you like to ask Douglas?
Well, the question for my 9-year-old is what flavor is coming next? The question that I have is whenever you see an organization that does the and people and planet and perfect and profits and brings those things together, they're making choices. They're making, in my view, what are the right choices. The challenge for many leaders is the right choices look like the wrong choices, and the wrong choices look like the right choices. So, what has he learned that can help other organizations see the right choices as the right choices?
Yeah. Well, two very good questions there, and I'm going to ask them both because I'm intrigued on the first one too. Being a fan of Tony's chocolate, so yeah, consider those asked. Uh, well, Scott, I must say I really enjoyed my conversation with you last time, but I've loved this conversation even more, and so maybe I do like history after all. I've definitely learned that disruption always casts a shadow, as you've mentioned, with issues to confront, but disruption isn't always bad. It transforms things that already exist. It creates what doesn't by making the expensive affordable and the complex maybe more simple. And me, like yourself, I'm an optimist, and so I'm with you in believing in the power of disruption to make the world a better place. So please do go out and buy this book, listeners, as it will sharpen your lens and help you see what otherwise you may miss. But you'll definitely enjoy it immensely. So, if people want to get in touch or learn more, where should they go, Scott?
So, epicdisruptions.com is where I'm putting everything around the book. And on social media, I live on LinkedIn. So, they can find me on LinkedIn.
Fabulous. Well, I follow you on LinkedIn, and I follow you with all your books that you've written. So thanks for all the great work. 9 books so far, and I must say I probably finished Epic Disruptions quicker than the others. So I loved it. So thanks again for writing this, Scott.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Cheers, Scott.
Okay, thanks, Nick.